There are 6 potential catalysts for anti-Israel sentiment that people are talking about, or should be talking about, in Australia. Which is not anti-Semitism, but which of course can and does bleed into it. So it's worth understanding what those are. The first is what we call the validation catalyst. The idea that official criticism of Israel unleashes or gives permission to Jew hate, which our friends at News Corp claim to believe.
We expect Israel to abide by international law.
That is a new low even for Penny Wong.
After the October 7 attacks in Israel, the first response from our Foreign Minister Penny Wong was to urge restraint and protection of civilian lives.
Those who hate and those who harm have been emboldened, and we've seen daily protests
as a result of hanging Israel out to dry.
It's effectively giving it a license or creating a permissive environment for people to go out and continue to say that Israel is guilty of the most monstrous crimes and the Jewish people in Australia should be held accountable for that.
Dave Sharma, whom we'll hear about quite a bit on the next video about Islamophobia, used the controversy to rip his deeply held conviction that criticism of Israel encourages anti-Semitism. Of course, those who believe it never show any curiosity about the fact that anti-Semitism has risen so much in the US, the one country which has criticized Israel the least, and so little in Mexico, relatively speaking, which has criticized Israel almost as much as Australian Greens. That fact, as well as the personal leadership of Claudia Sheinbaum, Mexico's first female and first Jewish president, strikes us as a far better example of best practice than the US, which is the country from which our anti-Semitism envoy seems to have taken most of her inspiration. The second is what we call the misattributed rage catalyst, or the simple idea that some Australians blame all Jews for crimes committed by Israel overseas.
As Israel commits these crimes against humanity and live streams them, and in some cases gleefully live streams them, we've seen soldiers doing this.
There are sections of the Australian community who do see people of the Jewish faith, wherever they are around the world, as part of Israel.
Israel doing that and saying it's in the name of Jews.
Therefore, statements of violence against Israel
that will create anti-Semitism.
Can very easily flow over into actions of violence against communities in our own country.
We don't dispute that this might exist, but we don't think it's significant. And it certainly hasn't led Zionists to temper their support for the military actions that would be driving this raid. A much more significant catalyst is what we call the cognitive dissonance catalyst, which causes both rage and pain. Ironically, for both Israel's critics and its supporters, one of the many areas in which we will argue Australians on both sides of this political debate have common ground and opportunity for solidarity. We've seen plenty of examples of cognitive dissonance already.
The U.S. supporting this genocide is essentially trampling on the soul of America.
A lot of people in this country and in the West in general have spent the last year and a half feeling like they're losing their minds.
It is a glaring contradiction.
It's so at odds with what people want to believe about this country.
I grew up thinking that, America stood for justice and equality and fairness.
We say we care about freedom and justice and self-determination.
It was defending human rights. What's happening now in Israel in supporting that genocide is that the U.S. is trampling human rights.
And yet, for some reason, we draw a line when it comes to Palestinians that accept them.
Just seeing the horror and wanting it to stop.
It's my tax money that's killing those Palestinian kids, that I'm doing this.
I agree.
And not wanting to see in their timeline every day another blown up baby that is blood on our hands and every taxpayer.
We're deliberately killing people. It's not a war, it's a slaughter. I don't think there's much difference between somebody getting killed by a bomb or getting killed by being thrown in a gas chamber.
And I think at a certain point there comes a kind of fracture.
What are the values, what are the ideals that Israel still stands for?
What does America stand for? You can't say it stands for justice and peace and human rights.
Something that every day for the last 9 months I've been asking myself.
Witnessing evidence of the worst things human beings can do to one another.
You gotta see, it stands for ethnic cleansing.
How is it that we can see this?
It stands for slaughtering innocent people.
And then people with power in this country are lying to us about this reality that we can all see.
And then being told that this is necessary and that this is good.
That hurts.
That's Ben and Jerry's co-founder, Ben Cohen. And the hurt he is talking about is the literal definition of what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, the pain that comes from behaving in ways that contradict your self-image and worldview.
People really seem to care when non-Muslims kill Muslims, and they really, really care when Jews kill Muslims, right? That's the thing that is just, PR plutonium in this world.
That's meditation expert Sam Harris, who is famous for his work in the area of meditation and human compassion.
And just take a few deep breaths.
He's even said that compassion is the wellspring of moral behavior, which just goes to show how important any practice like meditation must be.
And just feel the weight of your body.
That's why we're excited to hear more from him in our next video on Islamophobia.
Resting on your seat.
Where he will help us address common questions and open questions about Islam.
It remains to be demonstrated that Islam is compatible with modernity.
Like that one, which we addressed in our last video, but which we'll address again, bringing in expert voices like Mr. Harris's.
The heaviness.
And Mr. Murray's.
I'm so fed up of the double standards and all of this. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Muslims have been killed in the last 12 years by Bashar al-Assad and other Muslims in the civil war in Syria. There's no one on the streets of Sydney or Melbourne. There's no one on the streets of London.
Who, like Mr. Harris, has spent 20 years sharing opinions about Islam which, whatever you think of their competence or experience, are influential in Western society.
Their co-religionists, we're always told about, care so much about their co-religionists. Don't give a damn about their co-religionists. They really don't.
For now, let's merely say that the cognitive dissonance is another explanation for the behavior that Mr. Murray attributes to indifference.
Muslims do not love other Muslims. They have no love for them.
Needless to say, it's not hard to understand why the atrocities of a Putin or Bashar al-Assad do not trigger the same cognitive dissonance in the minds of Americans like Ben Cohen.
I tend to talk about the conflicts that my government is directly involved in, which I think is reasonable to me.
Likewise, it's not hard to understand why Muslims don't experience the same cognitive dissonance that Americans do when they see Zionists and Americans committing exactly the kinds of crimes that their worldview predicts that they would.
They have no love for the Palestinian peoples. None.
So cognitive dissonance is an incredibly important way to understand the reactions that different people are having to the actions of the State of Israel, and yes, to the actions of the United States of America. What's more, that cognitive dissonance can sometimes turn into another catalyst, which we call the resentment catalyst. We've already talked about the way anti-BDS legislation has put an asterisk next to the Jewish community in the U.S.
If you boycott against Israel, New York will boycott you.
So far, it's just that, an asterisk. BDS is still far too small, or anti-BDS legislation, to matter to anyone.
I think you can have any opinion you want on Israel. I'm not actually that interested. I personally like Israel. Whatever. The red line for me is, this is my country. My birthright is free speech. God gave me that right. Cannot take it away. And if you're telling me what I'm allowed to say in my country, you're my enemy. Like, it's just kind of that simple.
For the vast majority of people in states with anti-BDS legislation, this law has no practical effect. It is nothing more than a sop to megadonors. A sop that those very megadonors, if they had some political imagination, would recognize not only do they not need, but will ultimately undermine the very agenda they wish to promote. It is the literal definition of what the ancient Greeks called tragedy, when the hero, in a vain and futile attempt to defy the gods and escape his destiny, actually becomes the instrument which brings it to fruition.
I'm really offended by the fakeness. No, it's MAGA or it's America first to put another country first. No, it's not.
It rankles.
In Congress, everyone is chasing and pursuing and proclaiming their loyalty to a foreign country.
Just as was the case for the deicide libel throughout the history of Christianity, as we discussed in our last video. The real impact of anti-BDS legislation is, in fact, that asterisk. That asterisk has made Americans alert and sensitive to the ways their corrupt and imperfect democracy caters to some people more than it does to others. Not Jewish people, megadonors. many of whom by accident of history happen to be pro-Israel. And unfortunately for the next generation of Jewish Americans, they lack the historic sense to realize that scenes like these are going to make it very easy for Americans to attribute all sorts of things to the Jewish people.
This will go down in history books. The history of this era will say that Jewish people were the sledgehammer for fascism.
If you look at my colleagues' feeds now, they all look the same. They're all tweeting the same message, that we've got to support Israel and we've got to do this.
Since I've become a member of Congress since 2021, we have voted on 22 resolutions for Israel. We never vote on resolutions proclaiming great things about America. What about our own country? What about our own people?
If this Capitol crumbled to the ground, the one thing that would remain is our commitment to our aid, and I don't even call it aid, our cooperation with Israel.
It really is no different than the corruption that allows hedge fund managers to get away with paying capital gains tax instead of income tax on their bonus income. It's just that anti-BDS legislation is easy to understand. I don't need an accountant to explain it to me. Which then calls attention to other ways American political priorities seem misaligned.
When you put the interests of a country of 9 million people above your own.
No insight on the Americans killed by the Israeli military, Senator?
In a way that's just insulting. Yes.
I am pro-genocide.
And so the idea that our national anthem, I should say it's the Israel's national anthem,
wants to trample on your rights in service of his Israel first Jewish supremacist ideology.
People can't deal with that. Like their brains start to explode. And I think this is blowing up the coalition.
The American policy is that Israel can do whatever the hell it wants.
I mean, let's take the case of Jonathan Pollard, who's one of the biggest traitors in the history of the United States for passing classified information on to the Israeli government. Prime Minister Netanyahu used to visit our soil and actively campaign and urge our presidents of the United States to pardon Jonathan Pollard for betraying our country to his country.
Do you have any idea what they did with that classified information, those secrets? They gave them to the Soviet Union. They took our secrets and gave them to our main enemy, our really only global enemy. What?
Yeah.
All of this is creating an association in people's minds between their resentment about the failures of their democracy.
What democracy?
People understand that the political system in this country is largely corrupt, both parties.
A resentment which we believe is absolutely appropriate.
I have no power.
Why is that? You know the answer. The answer is that you have billionaires in both political parties determine what legislation gets to the floor and who is the candidate.
The resentment of the disproportionate influence of wealthy and powerful people on their democracy.
You know, Miriam and Sheldon would come into the White House probably almost more than anybody outside of people that work there.
Yeah, and it makes me sick.
That's treason, of course. It's also a middle finger in the face of every American.
Definitely.
And they were always after, and as soon as I give them something, always for Israel.
The government's going to take part of my earnings, not to help my fellow American citizens. It's not going to go to them. It's going to go toward the bombs.
An oligarchy is a society where small numbers of very wealthy people control the economic and political life of the country. I think we are moving rapidly in that direction.
To me, it feels like an almost privatized communism in a way.
Right. That's a very good point.
Only some of whom happen to be pro-Israel, and the discourse around anti-Semitism.
It's not anti-Semitic to say we shouldn't be fighting a war that Israel started. And it's not anti-Semitic to say we shouldn't be doing what Netanyahu is telling us to do.
And I just can't tell you how weird it is to listen to that supercut and think, okay, MTG is the one making the smartest, substantive, rational, and like empathetic points against this war.
She was maybe the only Republican in American politics to call what is happening in Gaza a genocide.
It's not anti-Semitic to say Americans' hard-earned tax dollars in a nation where we're $37 trillion in debt shouldn't be going to Israel or shouldn't be going to any country.
I think organizations like AIPAC and Christians United for Israel should register under the law as foreign agents because they are lobbying on behalf of Israel.
That is going to continue to have unfortunate consequences for Jewish Americans, unfortunately, including the vast majority of Jewish Americans who are not wealthy and not powerful and not super connected and not mega donors.
And in the backdrop of that, you have Congress cutting $1.1 trillion to Medicaid. By the way, also cutting funding to food assistance.
That we should be keeping those at home. We should keep that money at home.
It makes me beyond angry. I think it's so unbelievably unjust. If you speak out about it like I am right now, people try to smear you as an anti-Semite.
People are slandered in order to prevent conversations like this from happening.
Yes.
Jewish Americans who never flew on Epstein's planes and don't know anyone who did or might have.
I'm getting to the point where I almost don't care about the two parties anymore. If we can find a place to actually care about the economy and care about our children's ability to have a future and raise a family, then I don't care. I don't care who I have to work with.
Our worry is that the righteous anger against political corruption gets expressed simply as anger at Israel, or worse, anger at Jews.
Is Israel an unwelcoming place for Christians?
Christians in Jerusalem's Old City say they are often harassed, spit on, and even physically attacked.
They can assassinate sitting presidents.
These include the desecration of a Protestant cemetery on Mount Zion.
They can steal our secrets and hand it to the enemy.
An attack on international Christians during a day of prayer for Jerusalem.
You know, went to Israel. I spent 2 weeks there with the church, and we had an incredible time.
And harassment at a Messianic concert in Jerusalem.
We had only one incident where a small child spit on one of the pastors.
They can steal our technology. They can blackmail our politicians and businessmen. They can protect those who rape our children. They can murder Palestinian children. They can steal land. They can blackmail sitting presidents.
Jewish Americans who in 10 years' time will ask themselves why it's so hard to avoid the slanderous idea that they and their identity has anything to do with all these examples of a broken and corrupt politics and economy.
The nerve of Israel to demand America's weapons and money, but then refuse our touring Christians is astounding.
Israel has universal health care and Americans don't.
Which brings us back to that anti-BDS legislation we spoke about earlier in this video.
If you boycott against Israel, New York will boycott you.
The awareness it has raised is manifesting as anger not only against Israel, but also, sotto voce, against American Jews.
And the only people who support this kind of lunacy are in Mark Levin's demographic.
Is that a dog whistle?
Age demographic. Like, it's older people, young
Our
people.
Our parents' generation.
Oh, thank God. The age demographic. Whatever you think about men like Carlson, Gates, or organizations like OAN, the fact is they are speaking to an unaddressed resentment, one that neither party is willing to talk about. In this sense, the comparison with immigration resentment is apt. The thing is, and this was the mistake we made with immigration, if we don't like the way men like Tucker or Gates are speaking to it, the solution is not to pretend it doesn't exist.
I think Tom Cotton's rooting for MAGA.
No.
Probably not.
Well, we know Ted Cruz is not.
No, of course not.
That just creates the space for a political entrepreneur like Donald Trump to monopolize the subject and set the terms of debate in his or her own interest, rather than in the interest of truth and democracy. Which is why many sense opportunism in his newfound embrace of his identity as defender of woke Christian values against a corrupt system. Is it hypocritical given his personal history? Perhaps.
One thing, I'll just be honest, that makes me a little bit emotional is there are a lot of Christian Arabs, and a lot of them have been killed or mistreated with American money and weapons, and I think it's disgusting. And I think it's especially disgusting that Christian leaders in the United States have said nothing because they're bullied and bought off.
We don't know the man or consume his content, apart from the research we did for this project, and are not part of the demographic he serves. So we have no idea how sincere or opportunistic or combination of those two things his rebranding has been.
They use my money to kill Christians, blow up a church. No. Or to storm the Church of the Nativity. That's my religion. No, you don't get $1 if you do that. And by the way, we're not giving you any money until you promise to treat Christians as equals.
But either way, he certainly has a good track record spotting shifts in the Republican zeitgeist. You don't need to endorse his worldview to recognize that what he says is going to be significant for the Republican Party, for America, and I'm afraid, for Israel and Israeli Jews, as we'll soon see.
And you have a former Al-Qaeda leader as the current leader of Syria.
Well, we were told 9/11 was done by Al-Qaeda, so got to be pretty anti-Al-Qaeda, because like if they actually killed 3,000 Americans on 9/11, which everyone says they did, and I'm willing to believe that.
Now that's definitely a dog whistle. What's especially interesting is the way this has now penetrated the cable news watching demographic.
Killing of Saif Moussaoui. He was an American born in Florida. He was surrounded for 3 hours and beaten to death. It seems Israel's goodwill with the world has eroded very meaningfully. Christians blocked from the United States, Americans murdered in Judea and Samaria. We don't think it's a tenable position for Israel to say to our fellow countrymen, send us your money, send us your weapons, but don't send us your Christian tour groups or Arab Americans who want to visit family without being beaten to death.
There's obviously nothing racist about a Christian showing interest in the welfare of fellow Christians. But we can't help but note the opportunity that OAN must see to take share from Fox, who have spent 30 years telling their audience that there is a war on Christmas and Christians.
You're going to be saying Christmas again, and we say it proudly again.
You can say it's sleazy, but that seems to be the way things work in right-wing media.
Who's Ben Shapiro?
I have no idea.
The irony is that it is not Gaza that did this. Gaza matters to the left.
That kind of criticism, critiques Israel as a settler colony that is currently committing genocide.
It is anti-BDS legislation and the weaponization of anti-Semitism which did this.
Whereas Tucker Carlson or some of his ilk would arrive at criticism of Israel via very different means.
The point is that whether you are talking about the US or Australia, which we'll get to in a moment, these issues have suddenly become much more personal to people. Returning to Australia, young people today reading about a young woman bashed up at a protest or pepper sprayed at a campus encampment or PhD students picked up by plainclothes cops are going to have to ask themselves, who is responsible for all this? Suddenly, all this is starting to feel a lot more personal to people.
What's happening with the Ivy League? The University of Pennsylvania has said goodbye to their president. Harvard, Cornell, and now Columbia this week. Dr. Shafiq is now out, resigned.
This will go down in history books. The history of this era will say that Jewish people were the sledgehammer for fascism.
That's Yale professor Jason Stanley, who is himself Jewish and whom we met in the first video. And unfortunately, he is right. Millions of educated, upper-middle-class professional Americans will remember what their government did to them for a very long time, and who they claim to be doing it for. People remember the blacklisting of people in Hollywood at the height of the Red Scare.
Okay, thank you all very much. I think I can just slip away.
Here's Elia Kazan, vilified for decades for his cooperation with McCarthy's House Un-American Affairs Committee in 1952, essentially begging the Academy not to boo him off stage when he was granted a Lifetime Achievement Award in 1999. 1999, 47 years after what the industry considered to be treachery. People remember these things. Do you know how many people were actually blacklisted by Kazan's testimony? 8. 8 people. That's it. In 1999, only one of whom was still alive. Director Jules Dassin, who, in an ironic twist of fate, probably has Elia Kazan and McCarthy to thank for the fact that he was forced to leave the US, return to Europe, and meet and spend the rest of his life married to the legendary Greek actress Melina Mercouri. Not exactly like being sent to a gulag, I'd have to say. But people remembered the pall that was cast over the entire movie industry. People who weren't communists still remember the rage of seeing friends or people who could be friends persecuted for their beliefs. People remembered how profoundly un-American the entire episode was. And so 5 decades later, Americans wondered, as Kazan himself clearly wondered, whether anyone in that audience would shout him off the stage. All because he helped blacklist 8 people back in 1952. Only one of whom was still alive, convalescing in Athens.
It's truly amazing the extent to which Israel's supporters are going to enormous lengths to shut down free speech, not only on university campuses, but all across the country.
We've cut off hundreds of millions of dollars to the most elite, but at the same time, the most anti-Semitic universities.
This is reinforcing anti-Semitic tropes all across the political spectrum.
We have begun deporting illegal aliens.
It was a unanimous ruling by the Supreme Court ordering the administration to facilitate the return of Kilmar Abrigo Garcia, but he's not back.
That's former American ambassador to Israel and longtime friend of Donald Trump, David Friedman, whose satisfaction at the thought of using the levers of state power to persecute graduate students in America for their opinions and beliefs suggests he really doesn't know much about American history.
When Secretary Rubio rescinds the green card of a person he probably never heard of, it's an attack on freedom of speech like we haven't seen in this country in many generations.
A government can do in 2 months more than any organization can do in its lifetime.
Doing a favor for the president's Zionist backers.
We are never going to win the hearts and minds of anti-Semites because they don't have hearts and they don't have minds.
We're not going to win their hearts and minds because they don't have hearts and they don't have minds.
The single greatest threat to freedom of speech is Israel and its supporters here in the United States.
We can arrest them, we can deport them, and we can cut off their funding.
We can deport them, we can put them in jail, we can make their lives miserable, we can cut off their funding.
He doesn't seem to understand the effect his words and actions will have and are having on the people who will one day comprise the entire professional and managerial class of America.
The one thing you don't allow to be eroded or attacked is academic freedom. Like, that's the value you're really there to protect. And yet, that's clearly not happening.
We see universities saying things, including my university, like, we're going to keep our head down so we're not targeted.
I don't believe that university presidents wanted to crack down on student protesters in the way that they did. I think that the pressure for this came from above.
Americans who support this policy thinks it only affects anti-Zionist, terror-supporting students on visas who hate America.
This culture of fear, this idea that if we just do what they say, everything will be okay.
A year's worth of concessions and all sorts of attempts to prove they were cracking down on these protests, including adopting formally the IHRA definition. But either way, you still see these academic institutions, including the largest, most powerful ones, capitulating on what is supposed to be their core value.
They are destroying my country. They are intentionally destroying my country.
We live in a country where most people would prefer to stay down in the foxhole and not get up and actually fight this battle.
That's really a distraction from your work. Legal fees are very expensive. Most teachers and professors, if not all teachers and professors, would like to avoid that.
But every student at a university knows someone who is on a foreign visa, like Rumeza Ozturk, the tough student whose visa was canceled by order of Secretary Marco Rubio, apparently at the instigation of organizations like Betar and Canary Mission. For graduate students, it can typically be up to half the department. That means if you're an American-born student in a graduate school in America, you have foreign students who are your friends, your lab mates, your roommates, and yes, very often romantic partners or romantic partners of friends. Has David Friedman ever wondered how the arrests of students is going to affect those students as well? Americans. Even Americans who until recently might be supportive of Israel.
And then they're kicking students out that write articles they don't like.
Yeah, that's nuts.
That's a crazy thing to deport someone for. How could criticizing that, how could you not be allowed to have a perspective on something that's clearly horrific?
Undergraduates too. Every undergraduate in America has foreign-born classmates and interacts with foreign-born graduate students, grade their exams, lecture their tutorials, oversee lab work, and participate in campus life.
On Mahmoud Khalil, his actions were a foreign policy threat that he can be deported because of that. He is, of course, married to an American. He has a green card.
I lost one of the divine moments with my wife.
The ADL supported his arrest when it happened.
Moments after the delivery, I just heard him crying. And that literally got me in the heart.
Are you comfortable with the way this administration has been using the threat of deportation against protesters?
And I think it's just unbelievable that someone had the cruelty to take that moment from me.
That's Columbia graduate student Mahmoud Khalil talking about having missed the birth of his child, his American child, since his wife is a U.S. citizen.
We're not going to win their hearts and minds because they don't have hearts and they don't have minds.
Okay, so
a number of Jewish students even chained themselves to the gate of Columbia in their support of Mahmoud Khalil.
We don't know, but we wouldn't be surprised if a survey one day reveals that the American-born are the most angry of all. Because here's the thing that I think David Friedman and his supporters don't quite understand. Mahmoud Khalil grew up in Syria. Rumeza Ozturk is from Turkey. They probably never imagined being thrown into prison for their beliefs in America, but the idea isn't alien for them. They are not experiencing cognitive dissonance at this moment. Their American-born classmates who grew up with the promise of freedom of speech are the ones who are experiencing the pain and the rage of cognitive dissonance. That at this moment, something God-given has been taken from them.
The red line for me is, this is my country. My birthright is free speech. God gave me that right. You cannot take it away. And if you're telling me what I'm allowed to say in my country, you're my enemy. Like, it's just kind of that simple.
We believe that one day, when they wield the power that they collectively will no doubt exercise in America, they will seek and get their vengeance. Our only hope is that their rage stays directed at those who are truly responsible. As for self-confident men like Mr. Ackman, blessed with money, talent, intelligence, and connections, we suspect that before anyone realizes it, he too will learn the hard way the lesson Elia Kazan once learned 6 decades ago. Nobody, no matter what the domain, remains a god forever. Which brings us to the 5th catalyst, which we call the discreditation catalyst. When people decide that institutions they should trust can't be trusted, they look for someone else to trust instead. That is incredibly dangerous for our society.
You remember what the New York Times wrote in the editorial? They said Mamdani should not even have a line on the ballot. Nobody gave a damn.
I think cable news is in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
Fox News is, like all cable networks, dying.
Because whether people want to believe it or not, I think most Americans are actually pretty smart.
And they have 70-year-old people watching it pretty much exclusively.
You know, in my day, a New York Times endorsement, it was a very fraught moment.
And privy to the fact that they're not really getting the whole story when they watch traditional media.
Nothing more perfectly illustrates the disconnect between a media establishment thoroughly embedded with power and the reality that ordinary people see than the surreal rollout of anchor Jake Tapper's expose on Joe Biden.
With breaking news in our politics lead and a brand new excerpt from my upcoming book with Axios' Alex Thompson. It's called Original Sin. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. It's on Biden's decline. It's called Original Sin. I'm sure you've heard on May 20th. That's Tuesday. Original Sin. That's coming out in 3 weeks. On May 20th. That's just 19 days away. In 1 week and 1 day. Coming out in just a few days. Comes out Tuesday. You will not believe what we found out. We all knew. All of us knew.
The New York Times, who it endorsed, yes, it was a very big moment.
And I wish I'd known what I know now. I would not say I was incurious. I would say that I was one of the many people who was asking about this and was lied to.
When they read legacy media.
This is CNN.
I would not say I was incurious.
Now nobody gives a shit.
And so there's a lot more competition now.
The Al Jazeera effect.
Corrupt lamestream media. They've lost all credibility.
Right now in Australia, we are talking about anti-Semitism education in our schools.
A Sydney teacher and former TV reality show contestant is being investigated after showing his class videos described as dangerous, anti-Israel and anti-Semitic propaganda. Senior reporter Caroline Marcus has more.
But anti-Semitism education is worthless if a generation one day decides that the educational system can't be trusted.
The University of Sydney has removed a staff member from handling complaints from Jewish students and staff after her pro-Palestinian online activity was exposed. Caroline Marcus has this exclusive report.
Students later discovered the manager posting anti-Israel content online.
What's more, we're going to see the change happen faster than we think.
The reason that anti-Semitism is resurgent right now is because we're in a time where people are disoriented, they're disaffected, they're confused, they're shortchanged, and they're looking for an easy answer.
So they're looking for a scapegoat.
Yeah.
You don't need to be Donald Trump or Goebbels to recognize a political opportunity. Which brings us to the final and most ominous catalyst for anti-Israel sentiment and real anti-Semitism. Not I saw kafia and I felt unsafe anti-Semitism. Old school anti-Semitism. The kind of anti-Semitism Dreyfus would have recognized. And that is the red pill catalyst.
German people have not been prepared for the defeat.
That's exactly what happened to Germany in the 1920s.
Therefore, the only way that he can explain that defeat is by treachery.
Dolchstosslegende, for those who don't know, means dagger stab legend, or sometimes in English, the stab in the back theory. It emerged in the 1920s to help Germans answer a very simple question. How the heck did everything go so wrong? Germans who were adults in the 1920s were born into a world in which their country was the most technologically and culturally advanced in the world. And although it was nowhere near the United States or British Empire in terms of size or power or magnificence, it clearly had what you might call history's momentum behind it. So you can imagine that for someone struggling to wrap their minds around the reality of post-war hyperinflation and deprivation in Germany, even as some people seem to be doing quite well, thank you very much, the idea that those people planned it all along must have been incredibly compelling, even self-evident. No matter what happens in Israel, American millennials and Gen Zs are going to take the baton of leadership in a country that is not going to be the number one superpower they spent their lives being told was their destiny.
American global leadership is over.
In fact, America has already lost its economic primacy in the world. It's just the power of the US dollar hides it, but sooner or later it will be undeniable. There's a very good chance that before the decade is out, certainly before 2035, we think three things are going to happen which will be as cognitive dissonance-inducing for ordinary American millennials and Gen Zs as anything we've seen in the War of Gaza to date. First, likely a dramatic and traumatic re-rating of the US dollar relative to the renminbi, which will cause a dramatic adjustment to the cost of living, or at least to the cost of consumer goods. Two, a proxy war, and we hope it's just a proxy war, somewhere in the world which will overturn the myth of inevitable American supremacy in defense technology. One might say that Pakistan's use of Chinese air defense systems against India's Rafale jets is a precursor to exactly that kind of awakening. Finally, Chinese developments in areas like AI, supercomputing, quantum computing, and other areas will make it obvious that American universities and institutions are no longer the singular global leaders that many Americans spent their whole lives presuming they were destined to always be.
How far behind do you think China is?
China is not behind.
That won't be news to many people we know, but it's clearly news to CNBC, and frankly has not penetrated the American consciousness.
This is a country with great will, and they have great technical capabilities. 50% of the world's AI researchers are Chinese. And
when those things happen, a generation of Americans are going to have to grapple with something they are frankly unprepared to face today, figuring out how to be American in a world where someone other than America is number one. Whether that happens smoothly or abruptly, it's going to be traumatic. People are going to be asking themselves the same questions Germans asked themselves in the 1920s. How did this happen? And who exactly is to blame? That's a world in which America, and especially Red America, will be ripe for an American Dolchstosslegende, weaving together a compelling and coherent narrative of American history that puts it all together. The Kennedy assassination, the USS Liberty, the Iraq Wars, September 11, the GFC, the vaccines, Epstein's Island, Diddy's sex parties. The list can continue. Already on social media, we are seeing the evolution of a coherent meta-narrative that's putting all this together to a single explanation for everything that's gone wrong in America.
Look around, look at your streets, look at your country. Is your country cleaner? Is your country better for having fought Israel's wars for decades?
I'm not talking about a conspiracy theory. I'm talking about a conspiracy.
Oh, that's anti-Semitic.
Just as in the 1920s and 30s, an unfortunately large number of ordinary Germans came to believe was the case for their fellow Germans who happened to be Jews. We are not suggesting that the tragedy of the past is going to repeat. We don't expect it to, and we certainly hope it doesn't. But we do believe the conditions that led to those tragedies are being recreated as we speak by the failures and corruption of our democracy, and they are being amplified and associated with Jewish people because of things such as the dysfunctional discourse on anti-Semitism. What's even worse is that Americans are going to have to grapple with all of these things without the anchors of media and institutions they can trust. They're going to have to work out from scratch what's real and not real, because they will believe correctly that too many of their elites betrayed them and can no longer be trusted.
I would not say I was incurious.
They're disaffected, they're confused, they're shortchanged.
See, this is what I'm talking about. Turn around, look at that. You see what I mean? It's plump, it's juicy, it's 3 inches thick. Now, look at this sorry, miserable, squashed thing. Can anybody tell me what's wrong with this picture?
And they're looking for an easy answer.
So they're looking for a scapegoat.
Yeah.
As we said in our last video about the origins of the deicide libel, and its relevance to different theories and mental models of anti-Semitism, powerful people have a talent for being uncurious when it's convenient for them to be. And that can have awful consequences for innocent people for a very long time. As we've demonstrated in another video, that is going to be the perfect petri dish for the continued growth in the career of opportunists, or people who just don't like Jewish people, for whom our broken anti-Semitism discourse and its associations with the corruption of our media, politics, and society have been manna from heaven.
We pray for the people in Gaza. I don't care. People say that's third worldism. That's not third worldism. That's called being a good person.
That's right-wing online influencer Nick Fuentes, who is a self-described Christian nationalist, racist, and unapologetic anti-Semite.
I'll do you one better. That's called being a Christian.
If I told you that his profile has dramatically grown among the online right, would you be surprised, given he's been saying things like this at a time when even the most respected political and media figures twist and turn to avoid admitting that starving children is unacceptable?
I spin fellas, my swing quicker than Federer. I serve packing a bags bag on a regular. And I'ma tell her how she sing for me T-Pain. Your mama's...
The reality of Nick Fuentes, a young Holocaust revisionist, kind of Catholic.
That also is kind of what has made this Nick Fuentes' moment.
That is called being a Christian. It doesn't matter what color they are, not to sound liberal, but it's just true. It doesn't matter. We don't want him to live in America.
He is, I would say, for conservatives under 35, arguably the single most influential and admired conservative influencer, right-wing, far-right influencer, whatever you want to call him.
Made himself famous on the web for his incessant attacks on Jews.
And we don't agree with their values necessarily.
There's all sorts of weird things on the American political right.
There are few things as weird as the phenomenon of Nick Fuentes, who is now getting talked about by none other than Ezra Klein, and allegedly makes a reasonable amount of money sharing daily stream of consciousness musings with his 100,000 subscribers.
The Trinity is fundamentally different from Allah. What distinguishes the Trinity...
We'll admit we don't quite get it, but we aren't in his target demographic. However, thanks to the credibility he's earned by sounding distinctively empathetic on Gaza, he is being noticed and respected by some surprising voices.
As Christians, to see innocent people being slaughtered like this, you have to speak out against it. You have to pray for these people.
They are getting stronger.
He is one of the most influential and formidable figures in conservative discourse, and people can deny that. I'm sure there are a lot of people wanting to, but that's just the reality. And I think it's only going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
Which, in a world where mainstream media appear ruffled, puts him in pole position to also share his other views.
And the only people that say otherwise are spiritually Jewish or actually Jewish.
They're getting much stronger.
If you're uncomfortable with the idea of another eccentric and seemingly damaged loner with a clever mind...
Why am I listening to Tucker Carlson? Why am I listening to Candace Owen? Why am I nodding sometimes? I think a lot of people are having a bit of a crisis.
Gift for populist gab, an obsession with Jews, we think you probably ought to be.
People are going to have to accept that. People are going to have to grapple with that. People are going to have to confront that, because that is a reality.
The only people that their hearts are so hardened to the suffering of others that they could say there's a virtue in hating those people.
I think people who are worried about it, who think it's dangerous, whatever, really have no one to blame but themselves.
They're all guilty. They deserve to starve. Women, children.
At least they don't try to conceal their Jew hatred.
Because they're brown, really?
The least you can say about them is they're honest about their anti-Semitism.
Yes, they are. The question is, why? Who's responsible for this? Does anyone in Australia think that the censorship that has happened to date has created the result the people who advocated for that censorship promised?
How long do we have to learn the lesson that if you try and suppress things and ideas and people through censorship, through punishment, through silencing, through exclusion, you're just going to make them stronger?
When you turn to people like that because they're the only people seemingly criticizing the US military industrial complex, you're like, I am very confused and have a very uneasy feeling, but I don't know where else to go.
The problem is when you lie that aggressively,
the gap between what people can see and hear and read, what politicians are saying and what mainstream media outlets are saying is so incredibly vast.
And you use my government to do it and all of its armed institutions to do it, then you force me. You're making people radical.
Whatever you think of these people and their politics.
You know, on the one hand, I'm like, well, you know, maybe some people evolve and they change in their views and maybe they are driven by facts and now they're more inclusive.
It has politicized large numbers of people who weren't particularly political before.
There has to be a total mindset change.
So I think it's become totemic.
It's not where the party is. It's not where the world is.
Or is it more sinister and we should just not trust them because they have a very well-documented track record of being pretty batshit?
Yeah, it's somewhere on that spectrum.
Yeah, I would say.
On this question, they have their finger on the pulse of the nation.
When the Congress passes 22 anti-Semitism resolutions in the last few years, you turn people radical.
One of those resolutions they passed through the House actually conflated anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism. They're literally saying it is anti-Semitic, as in...
It is a crime to criticize a foreign country.
A foreign country, or even an ideology which believes in the existence of a foreign country.
Why are they doing that?
Young people, both on the left and the right, agree. They may not have the same motivations and underlying frustrations, but they all agree the status quo is broken.
People are starting to get resentful at the people who drew the red lines. And you have more credibility if you're over that red line than if you're too scared to cross it.
Where are our mother colleagues? Do your job properly.
Yeah. I said what I said.
The rest of our industry, do your job. Otherwise, I have to listen to Tucker Carlson, and that's really unfair.
Cutting off military funding for a government that is starving 2 million people and advertising how they're ethnically cleansing the Palestinians seems like the least we can do.
If you are complicit in a genocide, you have lost any legitimacy.
If you can't see that, if you can't say that...
It's such a moral red line.
Israel has a right to defend itself.
Israel has the right to defend itself. Like, what are you talking about? Against what, children?
Get some freaking self-respect and stop being ordered around by a client state. That's not good for us. It's not good for them. It's not good for anybody. It's like being screamed at by your children. No normal parent would allow that.
Cutting off power, cutting off water.
I think that Israel does have that right. It is an ongoing situation.
I think cutting off food, water and electricity is within international law.
I think that Israel has an absolute right to defend itself against terrorism.
That's not the question I asked.
It is an answer to the question.
Get some freaking self-respect.
Minister, is Prime Minister Netanyahu welcome on Australian soil? Well, Senator, I don't believe that Prime Minister Netanyahu is seeking a visit to Australia at this point. Well, is he welcome on Australian soil, though? Now, that's a hypothetical. I can assure you, under a Dutton government, he is welcome here. Well, is he welcome on Australian soil under you as the Foreign Minister and Mr Albanese as the Prime Minister? That is a hypothetical, and I won't be responding to it.
Get some freaking self-respect. It's like being screamed at by your children. The true villain here is not the state of Israel, the Jews. It's our leaders who are putting up with this.
Do you support or oppose genocide? And if you're on the wrong side of that, then I really have no use for you.
Oh, that's such an anti-Israel thing to say. It's not anti-Israel at all. It's a demand that the people whose job it is, whose sacred duty it is to defend and represent us, our leaders, do that. That they stand up and defend us against all potential threats, against all foreign countries to the extent they need to, and that they do not prostrate themselves before a foreign nation.
Table stakes. There's going to be no more military aid for Israel.
I'm worried that the contradictions are too obvious, the lies are too transparent. This is too insulting. I can't even deal with it.
Whatever you want to say about Nick Fuentes, he's crossed those red lines many times, and that's given him a great deal of credibility among increasingly large numbers of people.
I feel like the system is breaking as a result.
Yeah.
Famous instead, I let all that get to my